Speaker, I think it is incumbent upon me to point out to the Honourable House and to the general public certain observations, Madam Speaker. And I'm going to hold the member for St. John's Wood East that he said that these items that he is lowering today from 5% to 2.5% will be also exempted under the ABST when the ABST comes into force. Madam Speaker, 2.5 years ago, under the Antigua Labour Party, a sheet of plywood, Madam Speaker, retailed for 60 EC dollars. Today, Madam Speaker, 2.5 years later, that same sheet of plywood retails for $115, Madam Speaker. That is a fact. You can go into the hardware stores and verify what I'm saying. A bag of cement, Madam Speaker, 2.5 years ago, used to retail for $12.50, Madam Speaker. Today, that same bag of cement retails for $19 and change, closer to 20 EC dollars, Madam Speaker. Ready-mix concrete, 2.5 years ago from Antigua Masonry Products or from Antigua Concrete Services, used to sell for $260, $270 maximum per cubic yard. Madam Speaker, that same ready-mix concrete today retails for $330 per cubic yard. Look at the increase, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I commend the government for lowering the CST, but I think it's a bit disingenuous for the government to argue, Madam Speaker, that a reduction of a few goods, approximately 100 items on this list, will translate generally to lower prices in the economy across the board, Madam Speaker. This is a farce. We consume approximately in excess of 1,000 goods, Madam Speaker. And if you lower the price and say 120 items, Madam Speaker, what happened to the other 880 or the other 900 items? Madam Speaker, the other point that I want to raise briefly, when the government lowered the CST from 10% to 5%, there was empirical evidence to show, and the member for St. John City West brought some of those items here into this Honourable House to show the Honourable Minister of Finance that the savings were not necessarily being passed on by the supermarkets to the consumers. So I'm challenging the Ministry of Finance and the government to ensure that there are mechanisms, adequate mechanisms put in place so that the supermarkets are not the ones that are going to benefit from the reductions that you adumbrated here today, Mr. Minister. Remember, a lot of these goods on this schedule are not necessarily under price control, Madam Speaker. But the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Trade must ensure that adequate mechanisms are put in place so that the supermarkets do not benefit and the poor and vulnerable people out there do not receive the savings, Madam Speaker. Otherwise, in essence, what we'll be doing is benefiting the business class while the consumers will suffer. Madam Speaker, we know that we have an open economy. We import most of what we eat. We have an economy of approximately $1.2 billion in annual trade a year. So removing or lowering the CST on a few goods, Madam Speaker, does not necessarily translate to generally lowering the price in the economy of all your goods. Because, Madam Speaker, I know that the Minister, and I'm preempting him, the member for St. John's Wood East will come back and say, well, empirical evidence from the central banks and the OECD shows that we have a stable inflation rate of 2.5%. And it's fixed, and it's stable. That may be so, Madam Speaker. But in reality, when last have we updated the CPI When last have we updated the true basket of goods, Madam Speaker? And if the basket of goods that we truly consume as consumers in the society is reflective of what the Antigua and Barbuda public is consuming, then, Madam Speaker, the inflation rate will be well in excess of 4 or 5%. Madam Speaker, I'm very glad that the member for St. John's Rural East have said that these items will be also exempted from VAT. Because, Madam Speaker, with the introduction of the ABST, there will be great uncertainty in the economy. Take, for example, utility bills, Madam Speaker. Since this UPP administration have come to power, utility bills in this country have tripled. And that is a fact. It is a fact. In certain instances, they have quadrupled. They have quadrupled, Madam Speaker. And, Madam Speaker, we all know the fuel have gone up. We all know the fuel have doubled. A price of barrel for oil. We watch CNN. We know what the world price of oil. And you'd have expected maybe utility bills to have doubled. But they have tripled and they have quadrupled. And you promise in your agenda for change, Mr. Prime Minister,
sir,
that your government, yes, Madam Speaker, I'm sticking to the bill, Madam Speaker, but I'm saying that they promised that they would lower and that they would remove, the fuel variation charge. They've done nothing.
That's not on the debate now, though.
No, but Madam Speaker, we are dealing with the customs service tax, and we have to look at the impact it's going to have on the general economy, Madam Speaker. And fuel prices, Madam Speaker, and utility bills. Madam Speaker, under the Labour Party government, utility bills was a basic, essential commodity. The member for St. Phillips North, as Minister of APU for many years, ensured that utilities were affordable to everyone in the society. Madam Speaker, in fact, we treated utilities as an essential, basic commodity for all and sundry. And under the ALP, Madam Speaker, the Minister of Finance knows that we had a price equalization mechanism when it came to fuel products, where we ensured that the poor and vulnerable was protected. But the UPP government has now removed that price mechanism structure. And what has happened? The price of gas at the pumps, Madam Speaker, have gone up exponentially because by a factor of 3 or 4, Madam Speaker. Why? Because they've removed that price mechanism, that subsidy. We used to subsidize, Madam Speaker, we used the consumption tax, Madam Speaker, and we gave consumers a fixed price, and we subsidized it for 28 years. And anything in excess of that fixed price, we absorbed as a government. The Ministry of Finance have removed that now, and that is the reality of the situation, Madam Speaker. That is the reality. That coupled, Madam Speaker, that out of fiction, and they've added insult to injury, Madam Speaker, by then going and awarding very lucrative contracts.
Honourable Member, that yes, is not up for debate now.
No, Madam
Speaker. Let us confine the debate to what is before us. The budget speech will be here shortly. You'll have your opportunity to wax poetic and wide then. Please confine this debate to the bill at hand.
I will, Madam Speaker. And in closing, Madam Speaker, I'm going to wrap up. I just want the assurance from the member for St. John's Rural East that these goods on here will be also exempted from the ABST, and that the government will ensure that something is done to put back in the mechanism that the ALP government had to protect consumers when it comes to gas prices, and to do something about the APU electricity bills. People are bawling about it, Madam Speaker. You have utility bills. My computer clinic in Parham, we used to pay $270, $280 a month for electricity 2.5 years ago. It is $800 and $900 a month for the same center. Madam Speaker, good for the poor people out there too. They're paying, good for me, I can afford it. But what happened to the less fortunate out there? What happened to the less fortunate and the vulnerable that their utility bills have quadrupled? And you have committed in this agenda that you remove the fuel variation. You've not done it. And, Madam Speaker, I'm calling upon the Honourable Minister to do so and to ensure, Madam Speaker, to ensure that we lower the cost of living in this country. Thank you, Madam Speaker.